Kyle Larson has signed a multi-year contract extension with Hendrick Motorsports through the 2026 season. Denny Hamlin says that Kurt Busch is expected to return to the 45 car in 2023, and McLaren is interested in potentially putting Kyle Busch in air one of their cars for the Indy 500. What's going on, guys? This is Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start off winners so far in 2022. As so far in 2022, we've had 19 different winners. As Chris Buescher crossed the line last night at Bristol, he was able to become the 19th driver to win a race so far in 2022. This is tied for the most wins in a season in the modern era, back to 2001, where we scored 19 different winners. And with so many drivers that have not won this year, guys like Martin Truex Jr. and Ryan Blaney, who could still win this year, who've had the pace and speed to win, I would not be shocked and would not be surprised to see one of those guys go to victory lane. It's been so cool to see all the winners. The car has its issues we'll talk about later in this episode, but it's been great to see all the winners that we've seen so far in 2022. Pretty exciting to see for sure. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Chicago Street Course. Now, there was an article that Adam Stern basically tweeted on Friday morning, and the thing in title says, "Don't shake the art, please." And this is from basically the museums, basically saying, don't shake the art. Every time I see all these criticisms and all these criticisms for the Chicago Street Course race, some of them are valid, others like this, really, we're basically just grasping at straws at this point, trying to basically get mad about this race. Look, I get that people don't want this race, and I understand, and it's totally understandable. But some of the excuses are just absolutely stupid and absolutely ridiculous. But it is what it is, and we're still going to have a Chicago Street Course race in 2023, but people are just going to have to accept it, in my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Austin Dillon. As Austin Dillon was speaking to the media during media availabilities on Friday, and he says that his pit crew has contracts through 2027. So everyone on the pit crew that he currently has will be signed with his team, the 3 team, through the 2027 season. It's really good to see you have all pit crew members basically signed. It's good to see that because you have a really good knitted group together. Everything will work really perfectly and work really well with the team, considering the 3 team has generally been really fast this year on pit road. So that's really good to see for sure, and very happy to see that they will continue to work together as pit crew members. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Petty GMS Motorsports. As Kelly Crandall reported on Friday that Petty GMS Motorsports is going to be using Joe Gibbs Racing pit crew members for both the 42 and the 43 cars in 2023. They've already been using Joe Gibbs Racing pit crews for the 42 team, but now they're going to be working with the 43 team as well in 2023. For a lot of people saying, is this a common thing? This is kind of common. We've seen JTG Doherty do this in the past. That's why a lot of people thought they were going to be going back to Toyota at some particular point. So they're going to be using different pit crew members. I hope this can help their team. But then again, we've had Joe Gibbs Racing pit members go to other teams like 2311. Are usually not as good at pickers, and they generally struggle. That being said, hopefully Petty GMS Motorsports can do really good with these changes. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Brian Doza. As Brian Doza is going to drive a 28 for FDNY Racing in a couple weekends at Talladega Super Speedway. FDNY Racing tends to run all the Super Speed races, and Brian Doza has been behind the wheel of that truck in many of those specific races. Now, I would anticipate and expect that they're going to have to qualify their way in, as I would think there's going to be a lot of entries. They're going to be entering the Camping World Truck Series race. Hopefully, Brian Doza can have an opportunity to give his team an opportunity and a shot to make the field in a couple weeks at Talladega. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Brett Holmes. As Brett Holmes is going to drive a 32 for Brett Holmes Racing, his own organization, at Talladega. It's been hit or miss with the 32 team this year. They've had Connor Mosack in the car and Brett Holmes in the car as well. And it's been hit or miss so far this year. There's been a couple times where they've qualified for races, and there's been a couple races where they failed to qualify so far this year. Hopefully they're able to make the show. Hopefully the 32 car will have a really good chance and a really good opportunity to make the field. Hopefully they got a shot to get it done, in my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about F1 Las Vegas. Now, of course, in 2023, there is going to be a Las Vegas Grand Prix taking place in Formula One. That will be taking place on the November 18th weekend, if I'm not mistaken. And it was reported by Adam Stern that they're apparently going to be having general admissions and affordable pricing for the event as well. And the goal is to start the race at 1 a.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, due to the fact they want to have those European and Asian audiences able to watch the race. So, of course, catering to the Asian European audiences. No surprises there. Going back to affordable pricing. The affordable pricing is going to be way more expensive than a normal NASCAR race or other races. So, the affordable price in a Formula One is going to be like an Indy 500 ticket. It's going to be really still, I think it's going to be really, really expensive. And it's going to be a hot commodity ticket to try to get, but I'm not sure how it will be long term, but we'll see if people do show up to the race overall. We'll see what happens. But yeah, definitely interesting for sure that it's going to be a really, really expensive pricing for the event. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Josh Bilicki. Now, Josh Bilicki was originally supposed to be behind a 77 for Spire Motorsports, but Josh Bilicki basically revealed why he missed this race because Landon Cassill substituted for him. Well, Josh Bilicki basically revealed that he missed Bristol due to a hand injury. The plan for Josh Bilicki is to basically get healed up, and his next race he's going to be running is the Charlotte Roval. That makes a lot of sense why they basically had a driver switch, because he was originally on the entry list for the 77 car, but they had an entry list change, and Landon Cassill got behind the wheel. And Landon, I think, got a respectful top 25 finish, so good to see that for Landon Cassill. Wishing Josh Bilicki best and hoping for a speedy recovery, and hope we'll see him back behind the wheel and good enough to do really, really well with the team here at Charlotte Roval. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Josh Reaume. As it was reported after the Camp World Truck Series race on late Thursday, early Friday morning, that Josh Reaume went to the hospital after getting involved in a wreck, and he was diagnosed with a concussion. He will have follow-ups, MRIs, later this year, and he will basically probably miss out for a while and probably won't race for the rest of the year. He was involved in a wreck with Roger Carruth. Roger Carruth got into the back of him later, really had nowhere to go, spun into him, and Josh got into the outside wall. Wishing the best for Josh Reaume and wishing for a speedy recovery. Concussions are no joke, and we've seen drivers like Kurt Busch basically have to sit out in many, many races because of concussions. So, really unfortunate situation and really, really tough break. Wishing the best of luck for Josh Reaume and wishing for a speedy recovery so he can get back behind the wheel of the truck maybe at the end of the year. But I would think we're probably not going to see Josh Reaume for the rest of the season, considering there's only 7 races to go in a season. And for trucks, there's only 3 races to go. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Parker Kligerman. Now, after the Camp World Truck Series race took place at Bristol, Parker Kligerman was being interviewed about the kind of racing we saw. And Parker Kligerman says for Bristol, there should be less traction compound for the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series. He did say that the Cup Series is really going to be the high-paying ticket, but he says that there should be a little bit of a different product for the Truck Series and Xfinity Series, maybe adding less traction compound or even maybe no traction compound at all on the racetrack. I kind of agree with Parker Kligerman here in a sense. I think the traction compound was way too much for the truck race. The truck race was probably one of the most boring races of the year so far. Sure, there were some wrecks and stuff, but really the race is dominated by a couple drivers, and traffic really meant a lot. It was really hard to pass the field, and it was really difficult to pass if you were on newer tires to get by the older tire drivers. Definitely something that needs to be looked at. I think the fact that one of the things is that I think that they probably should not use as much traction compound for this race, but that is just my opinion. I do agree with Parker Kligerman, but that is just my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Bubba Wallace in the 45 team. Now, there was a lot of controversy during the Cup Series race on Saturday night in regards to the 45 team basically going back out on the racetrack. And I saw a lot of people, including the people on TV, basically criticizing why would the 45 car go back out on the track and also the 23 car. Well, Steve Lauletta, who is the president of 2311 Racing, he basically released why they basically stayed out on the racetrack. And the reason being is because they're in the owner's points position. They're currently fighting for owner's points. Yes, they have locked away into the round of 12 for the owner's points, but they want to get as many points as possible just in case they get to have a chance to go far if they don't make it to the championship 4. They're hoping that they can have an opportunity to pick up a lot of points. So that's why they went back out on the racetrack. But I didn't understand why the 23 car went out since they're not going for owners' points. But I think it makes a lot of sense why Bubba Wallace and the number 45 team went back out. They want to get as high because the higher they finish in the standings for the owners' championship, the more likely that they are probably going to get a lot more money as well. So I think I understand exactly what they're doing. I think it's a good decision they made. I understand it's a controversial move, but I think in my opinion, I don't see any problem with what they did, and I don't think it was a bad move that they made. I know it's controversial, but I think what they did was not that egregious. And trust me, I've seen more egregious stuff happen than basically what we saw from the 45 team. Believe me on that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Sammy Smith. Now, Sammy Smith, who of course won the ARCA race on Thursday evening, he won the 2022 ARCA East Championship. He also is the 2022 Sioux East and champion. He was the Sioux Showdown champion for ARCA as well. Sammy Smith's been really, really impressive this year. He's won a lot of ARCA races so far. I think he's won a couple main events, and he's also won the ARCA East Championship as well. Massive congratulations to Sammy Smith. I think Sammy Smith is a really talented driver. I think it's very likely that he is going to be behind the wheel of the 18 car for Joe Gibbs Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, since KBM is not going to be having a Toyota-backed team, and he's part of the TRD program. So we'll see what happens for Sammy Smith, but congratulations to him on winning those championships. He deserves it, in my opinion. Congratulations to him on getting the chance and being able to get it done. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Chicago Street Course. Now, this is one thing that was noted in regards to the NASCAR schedules. The Xfinity Series is going to be racing at the Chicago Street Course. And the reason that the Xfinity Series is racing at the Chicago Street Course is because that there is going to be no IMSA race that's going to be taking place. There have been some rumors and rumblings when they basically announced it that there was going to be like an IMSA GT race that was going to happen. But the Xfinity Series is going to be replacing them for this event. Now, here's what I want to say in regards to this event. I am not a big fan of Xfinity being here at Chicago Street Course. I don't think the racing is going to be good. I think it's really going to struggle. I don't think it's going to be terrible, but I don't think the racing is going to be really, really good. I'm not really expecting a good race. I'm not really expecting much. That being said, it was good to see that they're basically bringing the two main series there, but in my personal opinion, I don't think it's going to really, really work out. And honestly, I think the racing's probably going to struggle. And I think an IMSA race would have put on a better show, in my opinion, than the Xfinity Series. But we'll see what happens when the race actually does happen in 2023. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Parker Retzlaff. As Brian Nolan, who works at French, revealed on Twitter that he spoke to Parker Retzlaff, and Parker revealed to him that Parker has parted ways with RSS Racing. And he says his 2023 plans are still up in the air. Really tough break for Parker Retzlaff, because I think Parker Retzlaff is a very underrated and an extremely talented driver. Parker Retzlaff's had some really, really strong runs with RSS Racing this year. I remember some of those really impressive qualifying performances. Phoenix really comes to mind, where he qualified in the top 10, and his really great run at Richmond earlier this year as well. I hope a good team really picks up Parker. Maybe RFK, if they decide to expand to Xfinity again, they can pick him up, considering he is a driver. If RFK in the Peak Series, the Coca-Cola iRacing Series, he is a driver for that. I really hope he gets picked up by a really good organization for next year, because in my opinion, he absolutely deserves an opportunity to get behind the wheel of a really good car, considering he is an extremely talented driver. I do hope he gets an opportunity to drive for a good team in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Hailie Deegan. As it was reported during the Fox broadcast, Vince Walsh reported about halfway through the Truck Series race at Bristol that Hailie Deegan is expected to make her NASCAR Xfinity Series debut at some point later this year. It is unclear what ride she'll be driving for in the Xfinity Series. It would presume it have to be a Ford team, but it's expected she'll make a start near the end of the season. Now, look, has Hailie Deegan been really impressive in the Truck Series? No. But Ford is going to want to rush her up and give her some starts in Xfinity. And they've been trying to maybe give her some starts this year at some point. But let's be for real, her results this year in the NASCAR Truck Series have not been good. But I would not be surprised if she does end up doing well if she does well in this Xfinity Series race, regardless of the organization. I would presume it'll be SS Greenlight Racing. It'll probably be that 07 car, and I would think it'd probably be at like Phoenix or something along those lines would be her debut. It wouldn't surprise me in 2023 she does make more Xfinity Series starts, but I think getting some experience in Xfinity makes a lot of sense. Yes, I understand performances have not been really stellar. They haven't been really good, but it does not hurt her that she might get some opportunities and some shots to get behind the wheel. I think it'd be awesome if she got an opportunity, and hopefully if whatever race she's running, she'll do really good in that race. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about On Point Motorsports. It was reported by Chris Knight on Friday late afternoon that On Point Motorsports is at a crossroads. And if they do not find a driver that brings funding and sponsorship, they might end up shutting down and may not end up racing in 2023 as well. This is a really tough break for On Point Motorsports because if you've really noticed, they had Tate Fogelman in for pretty much the whole entire season. But from what I heard, there may be even some sponsorship and funding that really drove up for Tate Fogelman, and now Tate Fogelman has been driving the 26 for Rackley WAR Racing this year in select races. Whatever they do find, whoever they do end up finding to get behind the wheel, I think if Parker's got funding and sponsorship, I think Retzlaff would be a really good driver to get behind the wheel. Or maybe they get Parker Kligerman somehow, or maybe they partner up with Henderson Motorsports to be a two-car team. That'd be something that'd be really interesting to watch. But I really hope they can find something because we don't need less trucks in the field. We need more trucks in the field. Hopefully they can find someone to bring in with funding and sponsorship so they don't shut their team down, because if they shut their team down, that's just going to be another team that's going to fall, and it's going to be really disappointing in my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Noah Gragson. Now, we do have a couple stories in regards to Noah Gragson to talk to, but we're going to talk about Noah Gragson when it comes to his health. Now, if you watch every single NASCAR Xfinity Series race, you can tell that every time Noah Gragson wins, he ends up puking and getting sick in the race. Noah Gragson was speaking to media after the race, and he basically says he plans to consult doctors after the season to figure out what's going on. From what we know, Noah Gragson has said this, I think he said this under the World Bumper Clear, that he holds his breath in the last 10 laps of every single race, and that's why I think he ends up getting sick. That's one thing, though, is that he's going to have to work on his fitness, especially if he's going to be running 400 miles, and a lot of these races are going to be 400-mile races. I'm really worried that Noah Gragson may not make it through every single race. Yes, has he ran 400-mile races this year in 2022? Yes, but you cannot have a driver getting sick. The fitness has got to be worked on. I wonder if there's some fitness issues that could be playing a factor into that. But in my opinion, hopefully they can figure out what's going on with Noah Gragson so that we have really good help for Noah Gragson, because Noah Gragson is definitely really fun to watch. If he wins the championship this year for Xfinity, I think it's going to be a really fun watch for sure. We'll see if he gets the championship, but I think Gragson's going to definitely be a threat to win the championship in 2022, but he's got to work on his fitness, in my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Brad Keselowski. Now, of course, RFK Racing picked up their first win with Brad Keselowski as a team owner. And Brad Keselowski was speaking to the media, and he says that he actually wanted Chris Buescher to get into the number 21 a few years back. Now, he doesn't really recall how many years back, but I would think it goes back to 2020. Chris Buescher was driving the number 37 car for JTG Doherty Racing back then, and that 21 car was available. Paul Menard ended up choosing Matt DiBenedetto. But I think a lot of drivers really wanted Chris Buescher to get behind the wheel. And I think that we would have seen a really good run through Chris Buescher. I think it would have been on the par of what Matt DiBenedetto had done, and it would have not shocked me or surprised me if he would have gotten wins in the number 21 car. Now, looking at Chris Buescher, I think that they really could, with RFK Racing, I really think that they can basically build a team around Chris Buescher and make him a really good driver in this series, because I do really believe in Chris Buescher. I think he is generally one of the most underrated drivers in this series, and I think it'd been really cool if he did get an opportunity to get behind the wheel of the number 21 car, but I think this team is going to have a really good way to go. I think RFK Racing is headed toward the right direction. They've been showing signs of improvement all year long, and I cannot wait to see what they're going to have in store for the long-term future. So really excited for the future for them, and maybe it would have been cool if he did get an opportunity to do it, but at the same token, I think he really likes driving at RFK Racing. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Ty Gibbs versus Noah Gragson. Now, of course, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, Noah Gragson won the NASCAR Xfinity Series, but he would not win without some controversy. So, Noah Gragson and Ty Gibbs have had a little bit of history in 2022. Go all the way back to Portland. Well, Noah Gragson got into Ty Gibbs in this race. About 126, 127 laps in this race, Ty Gibbs was on the inside of Sheldon Creed battling for the race lead. Then Noah Gragson, when they were trying to get around traffic, he got into the back of Ty Gibbs, and Ty Gibbs unfortunately overcorrected and unfortunately collected poor Sheldon Creed and was eliminated. In the media center and during the media obligations, Ty Gibbs, you could tell, was not very happy, but he kept his composure and said that I basically had, and everything is great, very similar to what Kyle Busch has done, and really seemed upset, but really wasn't showing it. Noah Gragson, after winning, said that he kind of felt like that he was a little bit at fault, but also that Ty Gibbs was said, it's my fault for sure, but basically said he thought he was really, really clear going into there. When I look at the incident, I think Noah Gragson is definitely at fault. And I would not be surprised if Ty Gibbs pays him back here before the end of the year, especially if they're racing for championship, because it seems like those two right now are the two clear favorites to win the Xfinity Series championship right now. I really think that they got to work out their differences and hopefully they don't have more and more issues. But when it comes to that incident, I do agree that Noah Gragson is more at fault for the incident. And in my opinion, hopefully Noah is kind of washing his back, because we could see some more issues for those two if things get more haywire, and we might see some more chaos down the road between these two in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ryan Ellis. As it was announced on Thursday that Ryan Ellis is going to be returning to Alpha Prime Racing in 2023. And he's getting more starts and more opportunities to drive the 45 car. He'll run a minimum of 15 races with Alpha Prime Racing. It's unclear what races he'll run, but he might end up running more like 18 to 20 races by the end of the 2023 season. I think Ryan Ellis is one of the most underrated drivers in NASCAR today. He's done everything. He's worked on basically the cars. He's been working as a PR guy for Matt DiBenedetto at one point, and now he's got more opportunities to drive a race car once again. I think Ryan Ellis will do really, really good next year with Alpha Prime Racing. It seems like that team is really starting to hit their stride. We saw Stephen Parsons have a really, really impressive run where he had top 10 pace and top 10 speed. And I do think that if anyone can do a good job behind the wheel of this car, I think Ryan Ellis can. And he absolutely deserves this opportunity. So massive congratulations to Ryan Ellis on getting an amazing opportunity to return to Alpha Prime Racing. I think he's going to do a really, really good job, continue to drive for this team next year. I think he will help their team improve their performances, and I really think that he's going to do a good job helping the team. So, in my opinion, massive congratulations to him on getting the opportunity to continue driving for Alpha Prime Racing in 2023. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Colton Herta and the super license debacle. It sounds like very likely, according to an article from motorsports.com, it's sounding very, very likely that any opportunity for Colton Herta to even go to Formula 1 next year, it sounds like that those plans are off the window. Now, Colton Herta has to get 40 super license points, and he only has 32. The big reason why there's a lot of talk about it is because a lot of teams really want Colton Herta. They really see a lot of talent in Colton Herta. But here's the problem. He doesn't have the super license points to make a jump. I'm going to talk about a super license system because the super license system is a complete joke, and I've been really outspoken and against the super license system for many, many years. I think really since they brought that in, it's been such a joke for the series, and it's such a shame that a really talented driver like Colton Herta is not going to get that opportunity to drive this because so many people don't like him. And there's some truth to be said here. Basically, the Liberty Media and Formula One, they don't care about the American drivers, but they sure as hell will care about the money that they're getting from Americans. It's so frustrating because you have such a talented driver that I think is going to do really good in Formula One. I think he's better than some of the drivers in this series. And it's because you have a stupid super license system that is really, really flawed and really, really ridiculous and completely stupid in my honest opinion. So it's frustrating because Colton Herta, but he's really going to come back to enjoying next year in IndyCar and probably get enough license points anyways. But I think it's just so stupid and so frustrating to see a guy that absolutely deserves go to Formula One is not going to get the opportunity. It's so frustrating and so stupid in my opinion, but that's what you have when you have a super licensed system that just is really, really frustrating and a system that really is really flawed. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, we're going to have a few stories revolving around Kyle Busch in today's episode. The first one is about around sponsorship. It was reported by Adam Stern on late Thursday, early Friday morning. He reported that RCR has received interest in recent days from multiple prospective new sponsors of Kyle Busch. And also, they have a lot of different other sponsors that are partners of RCR that are willing to sponsor Kyle Busch. One in particular that's been really, really falling is Hot Wheels. And Hot Wheels has sponsored Richard Childress racing cars in the past, including Tyler Reddick, who drove the A car this year, won't be in the A car in 2023. Of course, you know at this point that Kyle Busch will be going to Richard Childress Racing next year to drive the A car. And it's sounding more and more likely that it more was a business decision from Joe Gibbs Racing to drop him. I know that Toyota really wanted to keep Kyle Busch, but it's sounding more likely that a lot of sponsors are willing to work with him. And I think Kyle Busch is one of the most marketable drivers out there. You think about Kyle Busch, his market value is I think around $2 to $2.5 million. So you have a lot of sponsors that are probably going to be willing to sponsor Kyle Busch. It's just really good to see you do have funding and you do have sponsorship that is willing to work with Kyle Busch. I think that a lot of sponsors, I would think Lenovo will continue sponsoring the A car next year. I think 3G could move on with Tyler Reddick in the next couple of years, but I can see them also staying with Richard Childress Racing. This is definitely one thing that we are definitely going to be for sure watching down the road in many, many ways. It's good to see that Kyle Busch does have sponsors that are willing to work with him, but I'm not entirely sure if we're going to see any changes there. So definitely for sure, really, really interesting to see and kind of interesting that he's already got sponsorship that's willing to work with him, despite everyone thinking that there weren't sponsors that were willing to work with him. But that's not the case. He did have sponsors that wanted him. It's just that I think they probably wanted him to go to other organizations at this particular point, in my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Elliott. Now, Chase Elliott and multiple drivers have been really speaking their mind in regards to the NASCAR Cup Series season. And Chase Elliott spoke to the media this past weekend, and he says that the season should end a little bit sooner, the Cup schedule, and he thinks we should have more night races on the schedule. Talking to me, he says that we're basically going to be in a losing battle with the NFL, and that's not a battle that we're going to win. So we should cut the season a little bit earlier. I actually do agree with Chase Elliott on the first point. I'll explain why. There's a way you could have 36 races, but why not have double headers? Or another suggestion, if you don't want to have 36 races but shorten the schedule, I think we need to shorten the schedule down to 32 races. Basically, every track only gets one date on the calendar, and you get one date on every track, and you have 32 different unique tracks. Therefore, you cut season down to 4 races, and you cut it down 4 races, and you end the season in early October instead of early November. If you even don't have that off week, you can end the season in late September. So, in my opinion, I think the season does need to end a little bit earlier. Go into more night races. I agree with Chase Elliott, there needs to be more night races, but unfortunately, I think everyone knows why, that they basically are not having more night races on Saturday nights. That's the thing. Saturday night races. We could have more Sunday night races. We already know that they're going to be adding a Sunday night race at Atlanta. I know people really want a Sunday night race at Nashville Super Speedway. So really, it's definitely for sure something that is going to be really interesting to watch for sure. Because again, we haven't had a lot of days revealed so far and times revealed for the events. So maybe we are going to see more Sunday night races. We do know that Bristol Derby is going to be a night race next year. We know the 500 will start in the day and end at night. And there's probably going to be other night races that are announced in the not-so-distant future as well. It's definitely really, really interesting for sure that Chase Elliott thinks we should end the season a little bit earlier, which I do not disagree with him. I agree with Chase Elliott on the fact that we probably should end the season a little bit earlier. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tyler Reddick. Now, Tyler Reddick was being interviewed by the media this past weekend at Bristol, and it was due to decisions that Richard Childress made. So Richard basically revealed to the media that he told Tyler Reddick about an hour before that he would not be returning to the 8 car in 2023, but would be going to a third Richard Childress Racing car. Tyler Reddick speaking to media this past week, he says he understands Richard's decision, is not angered by Richard's decision because he understands the premises, and basically said that he told Richard at the last minute that he was not going to be with the team, and basically told him 10 minutes before they'd be going to 2311 in 2024. Now, Tyler Reddick did say that he's hoping Richard will share that information really soon on what number he's going to be driving. Here's what I think. I think Reddick is going to be driving the 33 car. The 33 number is going to be available, and that 33 car has May starts in Cup this year with Austin Hill behind the wheel. And there's some rumblings he could make another start, a road course start nonetheless, maybe at the Shaw Roval later this year. I think it'll be the number 33 car. I think it'll probably be all the personnel on the 33, which will probably be guys that are not as good. I do not expect Reddick to be really good next year. I think Reddick is really going to struggle in 2023. I think he's going to, struggle compared to 2022 where he's gotten 2 wins. I think he'll have a very similar season to Jeremy Mayfield in the sense that since he's basically going to be in apparently the parts car and the R&D car, he's going to really struggle in that car. But he's going to be staying with the team next year. They basically confirmed that he's going to finish his contract. The only way I see him basically out is if like a 2311 does decide to buy him out. But we'll talk about why that's probably not going to happen. It's definitely something that's really interesting for sure. We're going to find out probably down the road what's going on there. And probably there are just some decisions that are going to be coming here in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RFK Racing. Gragson was speaking to the media after winning the race at Bristol Motor Speedway a couple of nights ago, and he says that RFK Racing's plan is eventually become a 4-car team once again in the not-so-distant future. RFK Racing has not been a 4-car team since 2011. Back in 2011, they had David Reagan in the 6. The 11 was driven by, the 17 was driven by Matt Kenseth, the 99 by Carl Edwards, and the 16 by Greg Biffle. RFK Racing also back in 2011 was a much better team. This year for RFK Racing has been somewhat of a struggle. So I think that this is something that's probably going to be in the long-term plans because I think in the short term for RFK Racing, it's great that they got their first win as an organization with Brad at the helm of the org. But here's the thing. They got to still work on their cars a little bit more. Like I said, they're showing a lot more progress. But before they decide to expand this, I would for sure love to see RFK Racing go ahead and expand the next year. I still believe and think that they're going to have to go ahead and work on making sure that their cars are definitely a lot better and making sure their performance is a lot better. If they've got speed like that the rest of the year, then they can start thinking about it. But they do need to 100% make sure that their cars are in really good shape and work on the performance of their cars so they can have an opportunity to do that. So hopefully, it would be cool, definitely cool to expand, but in my opinion, they need to 100% make sure they do go right ahead and make sure their cars are in really good shape. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch and Kyle Busch Motorsports. Now, Kyle Busch, of course, revealed at the press conference that he'd be going to Richard Childress Racing, that he says that Kyle Busch Motorsports will not be a Toyota team, and they're going to be a Chevy team in 2023. Kyle Busch was speaking to media this past week, and he says that he is still working on the future for Kyle Busch Motorsports on partners and sponsorships. He says he has to act fast because there's a lot of drivers that are getting already picked up for 2023. And there's going to be a lot of drivers that are going to be out of the KBM pipeline. It's unclear what the KBM future is going to look like. It's anticipated that Corey Heim and John Nemechek and Sammy Smith, who've all driven for Kyle Busch Motorsports this year, whether it's in ARCA or basically in the truck series, they are all probably going to be finding new jobs. Now, John Nemechek will talk about where he potentially could be coming here at the end of this episode. We also do have to talk about Corey Heim. I can see him jumping up. And then Sammy Smith. So they're going to have to get a new fleet. Now, I do not mention Chandler Smith because I don't think Chandler Smith is really part of TRD. So I could see him staying with KBM. I think that if you're Kyle Busch Motorsports, you got a lot of candidates. Parker Retzlaff would be a really good candidate. I think he's a really talented driver who could get the best behind the wheel. You got Carson Hocevar. Carson Hocevar is not confirmed to be back in Nice Motorsports. I know Nice really wants to keep him, but I think if Carson goes to Kyle Busch Motorsports, I think he's going to perform at a really good level in that number 4 or 18 or whatever the number is I think he'd do good. I also think that they will have an all-star car, and they'll have a lot of drivers in the Chevy pipeline, including potentially other teams like Hendrick and RCR, and even Trackhouse could really get behind the wheel of a KBM Chevy, because I think KBM is still going to be a really fast team. It's also rumored that maybe that GMS could shut their truck series team down, so Grant Enfinger would be another driver if GMS does truly shut down. I think Grant Enfinger would be another really good candidate to get behind the wheel of that car. It's going to be very interesting to watch who does get behind the wheel, and hopefully whoever does will do a really, really awesome and a really good job behind the wheel, considering I think it would be really awesome if they do get an opportunity to find really good drivers, and hopefully they do put some really good drivers behind the wheel in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Bristol. Now, while it was really, really cool to see Chris Buescher win, that was not really the big story of the race. So, the big story of the race was the insane mechanical failures. This was one of the most chaotic and most attrition-based races I have seen in a very, very long time. Yes, we saw the race at Coco 600 where like 25 cars finished, but that was basically off crashes. In this race, you had guys having power steering problems, you had mechanical failures, you had engines blowing up, you had playoff contenders running into problems. Everything that happened in this race could happen. Toyota, power steering issues. Ford's, tire issues. Majority of Fords had tire problems. Even Keselowski was leading, had a tire problem. Every Joe Gibbs car had issues on the car. And I think one of the big reasons why we saw a lot of mechanical failures is teams are pushing the PSIs a little bit. But also I think with this being Bristol and the Cup cars, with the next-gen cars, not really having a lot of testing at this track, I do believe that played a major, major role and a major factor into these issues. And NASCAR definitely has to look into the situation because this is a spec series. This is different in 2002 and 2012 because back in 2002, 2012, when you had attrition, it's like, hey, this is a race where basically you could work on the car. With these next-gen cars, you're really not allowed to touch them because this is a spec series now. So NASCAR is really going to have to go back to the drawing board on some other things. But also I think one thing when it comes to next-gen car, they do have to basically go right ahead and go there. Because we had a lot of drivers criticizing the parts. Martin Truex Jr., Kevin Harvick, Kyle Larson, even Chase Elliott was also a little bit critical, but he didn't really want to answer the question in regards to that. And they also got to work on the safety. But I do think NASCAR is going to find ways to work on this car. I think they will go ahead and do that, and I think they will absolutely find ways to work on this car to fix some problems. I think it's something to definitely watch for sure and see what happens in regards to that in the not-so-distant future. Now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Denny Hamlin speaking on Kyle Busch and him the possibility of Kyle Busch even having a chance of going to this car before going to Rich Schultz Racing. Now, we know at this particular point that Kyle Busch was going to be going to Rich Schultz Racing to drive the A-Kart in 2023. But at one point, 2311 Racing was a major, major possibility for Kyle Busch to go to. And Denny Hamlin spoke about that on Thursday on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. Denny Hamlin did say that they didn't inquire on Kyle Busch, but didn't have a long-term security for Kyle Busch. They did say that that could have been a possible option, but with a lot of people in the Toyota program, it did not feel very subtle. This did not really surprise me, considering the fact that they've got Kurt Busch, which we'll talk about here really shortly, and Tyler Reddick coming over in 2024. It was very unlikely that Kyle Busch was probably going to be staying with the team more than one season. Now, would have 2311 Racing been a good organization to go to with how much pace and speed they've had really in the last 2 months, the last 3 or 4 months, I should say? Yes, it would have been probably a good team, but probably not better than the 18 car. It also would have felt a little bit weird for Kyle Busch to be dropped out of the main Joe Gibbs Racing program to go to a satellite Toyota team that isn't as good as Joe Gibbs Racing has been for many years. So it would have felt really weird for Kyle to be out. But there would have been some positives. He'd be on the same team as Kurt Busch, who, of course, right now is currently out at the moment due to concussion protocols. It would have been on the same team as Bubba Wallace, who has really emerged as a pretty solid driver in the last 3 to 4 months. But here's the thing with Kyle Busch going to 2311, and this had been a possibility. This all really would have depended on if Kurt Busch's health, if he was going to stay. But again, Kyle Busch would have only been at this team for 1 year anyways. But with Kurt Busch more than likely coming back, and if Kyle not going to Rich Schultz Racing, I think RCR, though, with Kyle Busch going into next year, I think Kyle Busch is going to be a really strong threat in the races next year. And again, it would have been really fun for him to be with 23XI Racing. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I think Kyle Busch at 23XI Racing would have been really, really cool. And it's good that they tried to inquire because they were one of the big favorites. There was like 4 or 5 teams that were favorites. It was RCR, 23XI, Stewart-Haas Racing, Collie, and it kept switching back and forth on those teams. But eventually, it landed that he would be going to RCR. So I think 23XI's got a really good future ahead of them regardless because they've got some good drivers on their team and even some that could be potentially coming back here in the not-so-distant future. But in all seriousness and all honesty, it's good to see the Kyle Busch found his landing spot, but it won't be with 23XI Racing. It would have been a good pickup for the team, but it would have really, really sucked for Toyota because Kyle Busch would have been at a satellite team for 2023 if he did end up going to 23XI, but he's going to RCR, so he's going to be having a new fresh start with the program, Richard Childress Racing. And now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch and the possibility of racing in the Indianapolis 500. Now, we discussed this on the channel last Thursday, how Kyle Busch, in his contract clause with Richard Childress Racing, he has an opportunity to potentially race in the Indianapolis 500 in 2023. And one of the teams I mentioned was Arrow McLaren SP. Well, according to a report by Adam Stern just a few hours ago, he reported that Sam Smith, who is one of the co-owners of Arrow McLaren SP, he says that Sam Smith is interested in running Kyle Busch in the Indianapolis 500. He quotes from the article, he says, "I'd love to figure out a way to get him on my team. Do you have his number?" Arrow McLaren SP has been in talks, conversations. They might be looking at a 4th car for the Indianapolis 500. For 2023, for their full-time lineup, they're going to have Pat O'Ward in the 5, Alexander Rossi in probably the 66 car, and I would presume, or the 6 car perhaps, and then I would think Felix Rosenqvist is going to be in the 7 car. 3 drivers who end up finishing in the top 10 points, so their lineup is really, really stout. Arrow McLaren SP has also been really, really strong on the oval-style racing tracks. They've been really faster. Pat O'Ward won Iowa earlier this year. I think that they would be a really good team to go to. Now, I think a team to be better would be Team Penske, but I think the Arrow McLaren SP would be a really good team. And let's talk about Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch, a lot of drivers really want him to come and race Indy 500. Jimmy Johnson, who drove in NASCAR and was one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time, he said he wants Kyle Busch there. And Will Power has also publicly said that if there's anybody in the Cup Series field that should come over and try out the Indy 500, he really wants to race against Kyle Busch, especially a really dangerous Kyle Busch. He would love to have him in the series. Now, obviously, I think Kyle Busch, of course, now, because if he would have been with Toyota, it would have been really tough to go through. Kyle Busch has had opportunities to race Indy 500, but didn't get a really good shot at it. He actually had a contract for 2017 to race with Team Penske in the Indy 500, but Joe Gibbs would not let him. But the fact now that he has a basic clause to race Indy 500 if he wants to, I think it's going to be really, really fun. It would also be fun is if they brought Kyle Larson to run this event as well. I think both Kyles are the 2 best drivers in the field when it comes to talent and skill right now. Of course, the defending Cup Series champion and 2-time Cup Series champion. Both of them are really good drivers. Have Larson in the Team Penske car and have Kyle Busch driving the Sam Schmidt Arrow McLaren SP car. The 2 overall best Chevy teams currently at the moment in IndyCar would be those 2. I think it would be awesome if Kyle Busch got an opportunity. And I think if Kyle Busch does actually race Indy 500 next year, of course, he's got to make the show because you don't get basically locked in. It's not like NASCAR where you're basically locked in. You got to basically race your way in. I think Kyle Busch will qualify his way in, and I think he will actually be a threat to win the race. Kurt Busch, in his only start in the Indy 500, he ended up finishing 6th with Andretti Autosport in a Chevy. I think Kyle Busch will actually make the field, and I think he'll be absolutely a contender to win the Indy 500. This is definitely something to watch for sure, and in regards to Kyle Busch Indy 500 watch, and it's sounding very likely that this could end up being a very realistic possibility for 2023. We'll have to watch and see what happens, though. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kurt Busch. Now, we talked about Kurt Busch a lot recently on this channel, and it's because it's in regards to his status for 2023. Now, Denny Hamlin has reiterated multiple times that he's expecting Kurt Busch to be back. And he reiterated that again this past Thursday. He says that Kurt Busch has a contract with 23XI through 2023, and he has an option year for 2024 as well. And Denny Hamlin also knows that they do expect that Tyler Reddick will continue to finish his career with RCR, finish the season with RCR for transitioning over. And they do have a contingency plan ready to go in case that Kurt Busch does not come back. And that contingency plan, from what we hear, is John Hunter Nemechek, according to Bob Pockers, who works at Fox Sports. Now, they are expecting that Kurt Busch is going to be back in the number 45 car in 2023. Kurt Busch has been sitting out here for nearly basically the second half of the year. Kurt Busch has been sitting out since his Pocono crash and since he got a concussion earlier this year at Pocono and has been sitting out. Now, a lot of people like myself were really speculating that Kurt Busch was not going to come back, but I do think that Kurt Busch is actually going to return. The big question here when it comes to Kurt Busch is if he does officially come back to the number 45 car next year, how is his performance going to be? We've seen drivers who really struggled with their health after having major health problems, like Dale Jr., who had it very similarly, had a concussion. We saw Dale Jr. really struggle in 2017, even on super speedway tracks that tend to be his bread and butter, considering he's the son of Dale Earnhardt. He tends to have really great runs at super speedways, but he really struggled on super speedways in 2017. I am very worried that Kurt Busch is going to have issues. Yes, do I think Kurt Busch is a better driver than Dale Sr.? Yes. Not Dale Sr., Dale Jr. Yes. But I do think I'm a little worried because even like Sterling Martin, after his prime, he really struggled in Cup. I'm really nervous that when Kurt Busch comes back, he's going to struggle. But maybe he'll prove me wrong and ends up doing really well. But if he doesn't return, it sounds like though he's going to, John Hunter Nemechek sounds like the favorite to be the contingency plan. John Hunter Nemechek, of course, it's unclear what his future is looking like at the moment. His crew chief, Eric Phillips, will be moving over to 2311, so they could, if they wanted to, they could, if they don't get Kurt Busch back, they could have Eric Phillips work with John Hunter Nemechek, and I think that's a very big possibility, and one will probably end up hiring Eric Phillips to the team. But like I said, I think like most people are saying, I do think at this point Kurt Busch is going to come back next year. But I think next year is going to be the last year for Kurt Busch. I think 2023 is going to be the final year. I know he has an option year, but I think it's going to be very similar to Dale Earnhardt Jr. I think Kurt Busch is sitting out for the rest of the year. I think he's not risking it, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think he's helping, basically resting his health, trying to get his health in really good shape. And I do think in 2023, I think he'll be back next year in the 45 car. But I'm very worried that performance is going to really struggle. And if he gets involved in a lot of wrecks, it could cause a lot more brain damage. Concussions are something that absolutely need to be taken seriously. And he's really doing a good job to take care of his health. He's listening to his doctor's orders. He's tried to come back multiple times, but unfortunately, doctors have been like, no, we're not going to let you come back because we want to make sure your health is in really good shape, which makes a lot of sense to make sure your health's in good shape. And like I said, concussions are something that just don't go away. They can really flare up multiple times, and they could last for a long time, which is why drivers do end up retiring early and why we got to work on the safety of this next-gen car because it's super stiff. We can't have consistent wrecks after wreck causing concussions. It's something that definitely does need to be worked on. That being said, though, whenever Kurt Busch does return, I think a lot of people are going to be very happy. And if he does return at all in 2022, he'll be in the 23 car. But I think at this point, they're going to keep him out. But maybe they do bring Kurt Busch back for a race or two this year to see how he flies. That's one thing that we're definitely going to be watching to see what happens. But it's good to sound and learn like that Kurt Busch is going to come back to the number 45. I think they're going to try to bring him back next year. And I hope he does return next year because, again, I would love for sure to Kurt Busch to come back next year and race into 45. So it's sounding very likely he's going to be back in the 45 car. But if not, it won't be Reddick that's the backup. John Hunter, who was originally going to be the backup for a driver 2311 having problems. He was originally going to be the backup. I think he's right now the contingency plan if they do not end up getting Kurt Busch back. But it sounds very likely that he will be back in the number 45. Kurt Busch will be back in that 45 in 2023. And now we're going to ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, so far at this point, for this announcement happened, Chase Elliott and William Byron has signed contract extensions. Chase Elliott through 2027 with Hendrick Motorsports, with Napa signing a long-term extension with the team as well as sponsorship, I think up until 2028. William Byron has a contract that right now goes through 2025, and Liberty University signed an extension through 2028. And as of Thursday this past weekend, Kyle Larson himself announced that he has signed a multi-year contract extension to remain with Hendrick through the 2026 season. He will also have HendrickCars.com on the sponsorship as well because they've extended their sponsorship with Kyle Larson through 2026 and with Hendrick Motorsports through 2026 as well. And he's also going to be earning more money in this contract than he did in this past contract. This has been something that I've been expecting pretty much all year long, but been waiting on if there was actually going to be an extension for Mr. Kyle Larson or not. Young money has been really, really incredible in the last couple of years. From 2020, 2021, Kyle Larson won many, many races. He won 10 Cup Series races in 2021 and won the Cup Championship, including winning the All-Star race in 2021 and also winning the Coco 600 and taking home the NASCAR Cup Series Championship in one of the most dominant seasons we have ever seen in NASCAR Cup Series history. This year in 2022, he's not been at the top, but he's still been very, very good with 11 top 5s so far this year, and I think around 15 to 16 top 10s so far this year, and has scored 2 victories, which right now nobody has more than 2 wins except Chase Elliott. I think Kyle Larson is going to be a long-term driver at this organization. I do not expect that Kyle Larson is ever going to leave Hendrick Motorsports, and he will be staying with the team, in my opinion, long-term. And I think that in those next 4 or 5 years, I think he will become one of the most winningest drivers in NASCAR history. I'm not saying he's going to get up to Jeff Gordon's level by the end of his career, but if he wins like 10 or 11 races in some of these upcoming seasons, which is probably going to be less and less likely, but I do think by next year, with him probably figuring this car out by next year, this is a year where everyone's been really struggling to figure it out, which is why we've seen a lot of the parity at this particular point. But I look at Larson and what he's done. I think in the next years he will be a Cup champion again, and I think he's going to start winning more and more races as time does progress. So that's really good to see. Now transitioning over to the last Hendrick driver, Alex Bowman. Alex Bowman is the last driver Hendrick right now that is not completely set. He's going to have a new crew chief next year. Greg Guys is announced he's retiring from being a crew chief next year. So he's going to have a new crew chief. He's going to probably have potential of being out of Hendrick Motorsports. How long does Alex Bowman get an extension if he stays? The big question is, does Ally stay? If Ally stays long-term, yes, I do think Bowman gets an extension with the team. Probably at least a 1 to 2 year extension, but I would think he potentially could be out early. He's probably the one driver that's on the chopping block for the team currently at the moment. But going back to Kyle Larson, you all know how big of a fan I am of Kyle Larson. When they announced this contract extension for Kyle Larson, I was extremely excited to see it because he deserves this contract extension. And the fact he wasn't the first one kind of frustrated me because he's been better than William Byron for sure. And I think he's been up there with Chase Elliott this year. Elliott being really with Hendrick since the beginning. Not a surprise. Byron being a driver though isn't a surprise that he got an extension. But man, it's good to see that Kyle Larson finally got the monkey off his back through 2026. And now it's time for him to go out there and win a lot of races. And I think he will win a lot of races. I predict in the next 4 years for Kyle Larson, my prediction is that I think Kyle Larson is going to score at least 30-plus victories in that 4-year span. I think by next year he's going to start winning a lot more races. I know this year he's only won 2, but I think next year he's going to get back in his winning ways. And I think in that 4-year span, he will have another 10-win season. 10-win seasons are things you do not see. In 2021, he got the first 10-win season for the Cup Series since 2007 with Jimmy Johnson, which, funny thing, he took over Jimmy's old car and won the championship with them. So he's basically the replacement for Jimmy Johnson. I think Larson's such a really great talent, such a really great driver, and I think it's going to be really fun to watch to see what he ends up doing over the next few years. Hendrick Motorsports is almost set, and they've got a really young lineup as well. Larson just turning 30 years old. Chase Elliott, who will be 26 at the end of this year, 27 at the end of this year, and William Byron, who will be 25 at the end of this season. It's really exciting to see for sure, and amazing to see that Hendrick really has their future really going right now at the moment. They're one of the few teams that I think is in really good shape long term. I think the only big question is who will be in the 48 car long term. Will Bowman continue driving it, or will we see changes? That'll be one thing to watch, but massive congratulations to Kyle Larson on signing a contract extension with Hendrick Motorsports through 2026. So anyway, that is going to be for today's long NASCAR and Motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Turn notifications on to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below with that, and comment with your thoughts on today's episode. What are your thoughts on today's episode? What are your thoughts on Kyle Larson returning to Hendrick Motorsports in 2023 and staying there through 2026? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts on all the other news, including the Kurt Busch news? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on my channel, we're going to be having race picks for the upcoming race at Texas Motor Speedway. Good Lord, I'm not looking forward to that. But we've got race picks coming out for Texas. Then Wednesday will be an NASCAR news video. And there might be a special video out on Tuesday. Keep your eyes and ears on that. I might have an announcement coming in regards to that really, really soon. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. And I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.